Grinding treads and crushing tanks, a plain old conscript among the ranks. To draw the short straw, his misfortune has to feed the war bear her portion. She growls and slobbers, pleads and plays, and then scoffs it down in a ravenous craze. Just as he departs without wetting his pants, she scoffs him too, just to say thanks. Two things about this game are so ridiculous, they bring so much laughter, I get tears in my eyes. One is the way that the bears swim in this game. They just look like that. The second are the floating ore mines. The more you try and understand what's going on with them, the more you laugh. Anyway, this is your disclaimer. The video will contain spoilers for this 14-year-old game. I hope you enjoy it.
Do you have your white flag ready, Commander?
Insufficient funds.
Go!
Command & Conquer Red Alert 3 is a 2008 RTS from developer EA Los Angeles. At the time of its release, EA was definitely trying to make the most of the venerable Command & Conquer IP, which it had acquired after taking over the legendary Westwood Studios in 1998, and then shutting it down in 2003. Although some of the original Westwood staff stayed on with EA Los Angeles, and I think you can tell in games like this one. Command & Conquer 3 had come out in 2007 and was doing quite well, having successfully convinced everyone that EALA can produce an authentic, fun CNC game, although not your old school CNC game. So following it up a year later with Red Alert 3 makes a lot of sense, mirroring the original Westwood games in releasing Red Alert in 1996, following up the original Command & Conquer in 1995.
Our base is under attack. Insufficient funds.
While the EALA Command & Conquer games from the noughties are not as revolutionary, original or genre-defining as the Westwood games, what they are is entirely competent, polished sequels that pretty much deliver what a player who has good memories of the original games is looking for. I know it's not something EA is reputed for, but we are talking about the state of the company 15 years ago. Although, I remember they had aroused just as much ire from the common gamer for their business practices back then as they do now. Still, the Command & Conquer reboots from this period are proof that they did indeed once make good games. Maybe not great all-timer games, but good ones. I would like to someday, way down the track, make a special about the Westwood era RTS titles, and while some comparisons and context will be required for this video, I'll be trying my best to talk about Red Alert 3 as its own independent unit, and there is a good reason for that. Now, I know you are probably thinking I want to review this game because it's a meme. There are some lines in this game that get repeated all over the internet to this day, and rightly so. They are hilarious and delivered with a joy and luster that doesn't get old. But no, that's not why I'm making a video on it, nor why I would appeal to you to play it. What makes Red Alert 3 a great subject for a video, and a game I would recommend to you, is that it's a fun, concise, stable game that delivers the quintessential RTS experience with some bells and whistles to keep you interested. This is definitely not a one-of-a-kind classic, a groundbreaking title, or a multiplayer behemoth with a thriving competitive scene. Indeed, the meme factor is probably the only reason the game has any notoriety in 2022 at all. The point is, I was looking for the next game to review, and Red Alert 3 jumped out at me as something that I would enjoy the hell out of, wouldn't take so long to actually play and finish that the review would take months and months to make, and has enough great content to get a substantial video on. For very similar reasons, I recommend it to you. While you probably aren't about to make a video on it, if you are at all interested in RTS as a genre, either as a newbie or someone who hasn't played one in a decade or two and misses them, this is an excellent title to dip your toes in with and get that whistle wet for that old RTS action. If you are a big-time RTS fan who never really put them down and are still smashing it out on the StarCraft 2 ladders, this game probably has a lot less for you, but can be worth a spin just for how much it revels in its fun, low-budget spy movie camp aesthetic. Though, for those serious RTS heads, it lacks a strategic depth and honed balance that makes a great multiplayer title. It's low commitment, you can save any time, don't need to know anything about what's going on, and even the most difficult missions only have an hour and a half gaming time in them at most, give or take a few redos. So it's a good one to boot up and finish a cheeky mission here or there while you're getting on with your busy life. In short, Red Alert 3 is a game focused on delivering pure entertainment with little else going on. And that, in my book, is all a game really needs to do when you get right down to it. Great stories, emergent gameplay, groundbreaking innovation. All these things are wonderful, but not every game needs them. All a game really actually needs is to be fun. I bought the game when it was released in 2008. Finished it in a few days, and have replayed the main campaign probably once every 3 or 4 years since. I have had very little to do with the multiplayer, and am not recommending or reviewing that aspect of the game, though it has plenty to offer in that department, launching with single-player co-op, online and LAN modes. I never tried it online, nor could I ever convince anyone to play the co-op with me, but back in 2008, my friends and I were frequently having LAN parties, and CNC3 was such a favourite of ours that we had to try Red Alert 3. And it didn't really translate into the same kind of good times, so we very quickly went back to CNC3 and, of course, Command & Conquer Generals for our RTS fix. Given the lack of substantial competitive scene for Red Alert 3 today, I wager that most people felt the same. To clarify, I'm not saying that there is no competitive scene for Red Alert 3, I'm sure there is. What I'm saying is, ain't nobody out there making bank on prize money and sponsorships like they do playing in the inevitable multiplayer RTS comparison that is StarCraft. I tried to look up prize money for Red Alert 3, and I think there are competitions where you can win $100 as opposed to the tens of thousands you can win playing StarCraft. There's absolutely plenty to do on the multiplayer front with this game, but it just didn't pass the test of time the way I'm sure that EA and the developers were hoping it would. Still, it'd be remiss of me not to mention it, and I'm sure there are some people in this world who it is just the thing for. I will definitely touch on the multiplayer a bit again later, but this video is about the campaign, of course, which, as mentioned, you can co-op, and I think if you had a buddy up for the co-op, it'd be a grand old time. If you are like me and don't have a buddy, it's no big deal. The game just has AI commanders help you out instead, who are either way too competent or way too incompetent, depending on the mission. Either way, it doesn't really matter. The AI co-commanders are fun additions, but on the difficult levels, I often saw them get annihilated early, but it hardly impeded me from beating the level with a bit of persistence by myself. On the easy levels that the friendly AI got the upper hand on, just made what was already an entertaining cruise into an even more entertaining cruise. If you had an actual second player in that seat with you for co-op, I'm sure you could put your heads together and you'd be able to absolutely cheese even the hardest of levels. I mean, there are ways to absolutely cheese some of the harder levels even without the co-op. On a more serious game, these things might be criticisms, but on Red Alert 3, well, the idea of getting a mate in to cheese these dumb spy thriller B-movie science fiction send-up missions, it just sounds like a lot of fun to me. Some snacks, maybe some beer, and whatever you like to smoke or vape, and it'd be like a silly movie night meets a LAN party. And if that doesn't sound like a good time to you, you are on the wrong YouTube channel. Maybe if I see some success with this channel and there's demand, one day I'd really like to come back to Red Alert 3 and co-op it for you.
The Premier is gone.
Yes, the coward has already fled. The USSR is at death's door, comrade.
Which is why we must hurry.
So, the opening, before you even get to the first menu, sets the whole game up. The Soviets are about to succumb to defeat. If you've played other Red Alert games, the finer details of the crazy alternate history setting and technology will be well known to you, but for summary's sake, in this setting, Albert Einstein is a key figure whose technological innovations basically amount to the Allies' victory. So a Soviet mad scientist type invents a secret time machine, and he and a general and a colonel use it at the last possible moment before defeat to go back in time and assassinate Einstein. When they return to their own timeline, they find that the Soviets never lost to the Allies, and that one amongst their rank, Colonel Chudenko, played by Tim Curry, is now the premier and outranks the general. Without Einstein, nuclear energy and weapons have not been invented. And as an unintended consequence, there is now a third superpower and playable faction, the Japanese Empire of the Rising Sun. With this setup, everything from the previous games is completely moot. It's essentially a blank slate and setting for Red Alert 3, connected thematically and stylistically to previous games, but otherwise just completely its own independent thing. This is why I recommend it to people new to the RTS, or otherwise departed from the genre for a long time. You really don't need to know anything at all, except what the opening sequence shows you. Soviets, time travel, Cold War, spy thriller, pulpy alternate, history send-up. All the characters are very silly cartoons with no real motivations or depth, just a whole lot of ham and set dressing. It's actually kind of brilliant just how well this game is directed in that sense. There is nothing extraneous, probably more for budget reasons than anything else. You get exactly the amount of context, character and dialogue you need for the campaign to work, and that's all. It's admirably tight and disciplined, and I suppose they have to be, given the leader of each of the three factions are very expensive actors who, even for me in 2008, were major selling points for the game. Tim Curry as Premier Chudenko, George Takei as the Emperor, and J.K. Simmons as President Ackerman. These are three of the world's most legendary and capable character actors who always slay anything they are in, and they absolutely kill it here in Red Alert 3. In general, all the FMV's cutscenes in the game are wonderful, often very well acted, and, I admit, occasionally very poorly acted, even by the big shot stars, but with awesome set dressing and costumes that really sell the whole thing. When I say the whole thing, I don't mean these more traditional film work FMV sequences make you really believe you're in an alternate history with crazy Soviet time travel shenanigans, but it really sells the schlocky B-movie vibe that allows all the other silliness to then naturally sit amongst it, with no awkwardness bringing you out of the thing. A real risk on a project so outrageous, silly and over the top as this one. So, when you take in the costumes that are very detailed but on close inspection look just that little bit too cheap to possibly be real, the sets full to the brim with hokey props, the dumb stereotypical accents, and just the general hamminess of the conviction of the whole thing, hell yeah, you're ready for some time-travelling Russians fighting anime mecha under the shadow of the Statue of Liberty. Honestly, if it weren't so silly, the whole thing could be pretty racist. But it leans so far into its stereotypes and send-ups and applies them so universally that at no point is anyone involved in the production, or even the dumbest player, ever really confused about this being a serious depiction of any nation or culture. It feels more like a send-up of a Cold War American TV movie spy thriller than sincere representation. If they didn't also send up the UK and America, I think it would feel a lot worse, but they do, and because no culture or character is free from the irreverent, cartoonish send-up, it feels like a fun, cohesive world, where sure, every Russian drinks vodka and praises the motherland, the Japanese are all honor-obsessed, robotics-loving samurai, but just as much every American wears aviators and worships Coca-Cola and freedom, and the English all wear top hats and polish their monocles and say, "What ho, have at you, chap." There is, however, one thing that doesn't sit right with me, and that's the puerile calendar girl appeal to male sexual fantasy. Each faction in the game has a comms officer, played by a very attractive young lady, whose role is essentially to brief you before each mission. In this sense, they are actually the most significant and major roles in the game. As a player, they are your main points of understanding and interaction with the characters and setting, and they are the characters you spend the most time with by far. They are well acted, especially the Russian officer Dasha, but when you finish each campaign, they present themselves to you as a reward. And look, I get it. Just like a B-movie, at the end, the lead gets the girl. Since you get to play the lead, or commander, as you get called, you get the girl. To a degree, this kind of one-dimensional pin-up calendar girl content does help sell the authenticity of that B-movie setting. I also understand that the whole game is a power fantasy where important people look you in the eye and call you commander, and it is consistent with that power fantasy. But it's just done in such an abrupt, consumer-like way that it's just gross to me, and I feel like I need to, in turn, warn you about it. It doesn't intersect with the gameplay in any way at all, so it's only a very minor point of criticism that shouldn't interfere with your enjoyment of the actual game part of this game. It's just so servile in its presentation to you. You're the big shot commander, you save the world, so the only women you interact with, of course, fall over for you the first chance they get. It is especially nauseating at the end of the Allied campaign, where both the comms officer and the legendary Commander Tanya proposition you at the same time. It just comes off as a cheap, unnecessary and juvenile appeal to the sexual power fantasy of their presumably highly straight male target audience, and it puts me off. Does it help sell the setting and the world of the game? Yes, a tiny bit. Does it help sell the game in a literal sense? Definitely, without question. Would we have lost anything had it not been in the game? No, we wouldn't have lost a thing. The game would have been just as good without it, and the characters in question would have been just as good without it. Not that I'm against sexuality in this game or other games, just that it needs to be done better than this before I'm on board. I admit back in 2008 I was on board, and stupid teenage me, who was absolutely the target demographic of this game, really enjoyed it. As an adult, I find it off-putting and juvenile. Go figure what 15 years of life experience will do. It's little surprise that this came out of EALA circa 2008. Gaming and gaming studios are still very bro-y in culture to this day, despite significant inroads by other identities and cultures. An EA studio in 2008? I can see the backward baseball caps, red plastic beer pong cups, and string-thin muscle singlets from here. It's definitely a product of its time and place, and I'm sure in monetary terms, the direction that led to it paid off for them. From the benefit of 15 years of maturity, it's easy to see how you could have had a sexual charge to this game without it being so gross. It could have been a bit more burlesque, empowering, and fun for all involved. Certainly the performers and costuming would probably have cherished the chance to really make something out of that aspect of the game's presentation. When I look at it with that kind of an eye, it actually looks like they are almost on the cusp of delivering it too. The costumes and performances have just a hint of a more mature, dignified fun to them, but the direction of the game means that there is simply no room in time or budget for anything other than one-note servile flirtation and fan service aimed at a nebulous, anonymous 15 to 30-year-old Western straight male. Did this direction pay off for EA in terms of their wallets? Yes, they got exactly what they wanted in that sense. They used the time and money they had in a very wise manner when only thought about from that perspective. Did this direction pay off in terms of this being a cultural work that holds up over the long term? No, not at all. It is, in fact, one of the only directorial decisions about the game that has aged disgracefully and makes the experience worse. Not to mention it may serve to alienate a diversity of people who would otherwise love the game and just aren't in their narrow target demographic. But hey, they nailed their target audience of bored, frustrated 17-year-old straight white boys and got their money, so I doubt they care very much. They 100% were never under any circumstances going to make this game with the idea people were still going to be talking about it 15 years later. It's cheap, disposable popcorn culture, and you get what you pay for. Still, if you are out there playing this game and it alienates and excludes you, I feel for you. But fortunately, as I mentioned earlier, this aspect of the game doesn't actually intersect with the gameplay at all, and otherwise, everything else stands up. With that said, I'm also not here to judge you if you happen to enjoy this aspect of the game, regardless of your identity or background. As I admitted earlier, I also once used to enjoy it. But I couldn't discuss this game with sincerity without mentioning how it grated on me, and why I feel that way. As far as RTSs go, this is not a game teeming with new, innovative ideas. Nor was it released at a time in the RTS genre's life cycle where innovation was really called for. In 2008, StarCraft 2 was still 2 years away, and it felt like every studio still making RTS were aiming for that next big multiplayer hit. As a result, innovation was not the goal, rather delivering an extremely polished variation of the genre's hallmarks that was conducive to a thriving multiplayer scene seemed to be what was on the menu. Fair enough, by 2008 RTS was 13 years old and had seen most of its defining titles and innovations. Red Alert 3 is a great starting point to either check out RTS for the first time or start your journey revisiting the genre because of this. It had the benefit of grabbing all the ideas that already work so well for other RTS, and more specifically Command & Conquer and the Red Alert series, and then polished them. As a result, we have a very stable game, with top-notch presentation that just works with zero bugs or frustrations. It certainly isn't as important a game as other RTS games, and that's because it takes zero risks. It is a rehash with few ideas of its own. This being a video game for entertainment and not some filmic or literary masterpiece, there is nothing wrong with that at all, and it's not a criticism. And if you enjoy the gameplay mechanics, it's actually a bloody wonderful thing. Why try and reinvent the wheel when you can refine it, twist it, make it that little bit more effective and that little bit more fun? I'm not trying to say that there's no creativity here, because there's plenty and it's done very well, or that there are no features or mechanics that aren't original, just that this is not a game that moved the genre forwards at all. Its twists and surprises belong to it alone and don't get rehashed by other games to get twisted again further into the future. This game takes the classic RTS rock, paper, scissors rule of 3 factions and brings it to Red Alert. The classic Westwood Command & Conquer and Red Alert only featured 2 factions. The EA era sequels decide to introduce a third distinct faction to both Command & Conquer 3 and Red Alert 3, which I will refrain from judging as an addition to these games in terms of their overarching legacy as the very distinct Command & Conquer style RTS, as I do think the more rabid Westwood fans do have some substance to the arguments that the EA game's departure from the original format isn't for the best. But like I said earlier in reference to the opening cinematic, despite this being a direct sequel with the number 3 on the end, I really consider this its own completely independent unit of a game that's more Red Alert-esque than it is straight up Red Alert. So none of the changes from the Westwood style really bother me at all. As such, I love this game has really taken that aforementioned rock, paper, scissors style Trinity gameplay and buffed it to extract as much strategic and tactical gameplay as well as fun out of it as they can. You see, it isn't just that there are 3 factions, but that there are also 3 major types of forces: land, air, and sea. And boy, does this game's actual mechanics revolve around these 3 different types of units more than most, and many units in the game usually have the ability to cross over between at least 2 of the 3 types of terrain. For example, many but not all vehicles and infantry can traverse water as easily as land, and you can build most buildings on water as well as land too. For the Japanese, several of their units can transform into aircraft, and in the case of one unit, it can do all 3. So what you get is a strategic and tactical trinity that no matter what context or situation you are in gives you options and tactics. On top of this, every single unit has a secondary ability you can use by hitting the F key. Special abilities for units are a staple RTS trope, but not usually does every unit have a special ability, and to have every unit entirely conceived around their double function and have that interface with that duality simplified by a single key works together so well when you are under the pump deploying your micro. It puts the focus off your skill with the controls and interface and back onto your knowledge of the actual units and how they counter and interact with each other, and how in turn they interact with the land, air, sea and faction trinities. That price for the special ability is every unit only has a single one and it's designed entirely around it, which means no special units whose entire purpose is to sling out lots of different specials. But in this game it really works very well, and I wouldn't want it any other way. And as a bonus, there is also no units who don't have any abilities at all. This probably isn't everybody's cup of tea, but I enjoy it, and the synergies and flexibility it produces are one of the things that gives this game enduring replayability to me. This is not an RTS where you can make a big horde of units, grab them all, click on the enemy's base and sit back and watch your victory. You need to be actively micromanaging your unit's abilities and planning counters and solutions, or you will be stomped. That kind of involvement is really where the fun is for me, and later in the video as I go through the campaign you'll get to see lots of examples of what I'm talking about. The land, air, sea thing also affects the maps in this game. Every single one is made with this in mind, often incorporating different elevations and large water sections so that you must use multi-pronged strategies to overcome your opponent's offenses and defenses. You might realise you can bombard an enemy's power grid with a naval unit, which would cripple their defences and allow your land units to storm their base. But their base is elevated and there is nowhere easy to land your forces, so you have to airdrop them, which means you have to also counter their air force, all while fending off their attempts to counter your own naval bombardment and defending your base from your enemy, and so on and so forth. You may have a map that has a huge coastline, so you deploy a huge navy and counter your enemy only to find that it was a feint and they've built a secret air base at the other end of the map and are ready to bomb your navy to kingdom come. It's a game that even in the maps rewards you working with the variety and synergies available and punishes you for ignoring them. On top of that, while the graphics even at the time weren't spectacular, Crisis was released the year before in 2007 for reference, I find the art direction makes this game a real looker. Lots of stylistic choices over beefy graphical ones. I especially like the variety of blues in the oceans and greens and yellows on the land. The ocean practically glitters and sparkles in this game. You get to play levels set all over the world and blow up stuff all over the world to boot, and those levels always look good. A sunken naval unit under a crisp blue tropical ocean, a snow-covered square in Russia with Christmas lights up, palm trees swaying in the breeze in Cuba. This game won't and didn't win any awards for graphical fidelity, but it still looks and feels great. Everything is crisp and defined. Great readability and silhouettes for all units and structures, and luscious environments to play out your silly war games. With maps providing plenty of tactical and strategic depth, what more could you ask for? I do know that for some, the more cartoony, silly look will be a huge turn-off, like when the buildings explode into flat-pack sections like they were sets on a film or in a theatre instead of real buildings. But honestly, this whole game's MO is to ratchet the goofiness up by 1,000 compared to Westwood Red Alert, and Red Alert wasn't even the most serious game ever made, so the graphics got off lightly. In short, I like the graphics. They're good, they get the job done. Sometimes I find them pretty, but I understand if you don't. The music in this game is amazing and I love it. Frank Klepacki, the composer from the original game, was brought back to give the game that authentic Red Alert feel. And I think he only redid a couple of his old tunes from the CNC games, but it includes the legendary classic Hell March. Even though he didn't do most of the music, I think his style and influence hangs over this game because just like with the rest of everything to do with this game, they nailed that Red Alert style without ever actually being OG Red Alert. It has its own character and style that sounds like Red Alert, but not so much like the previous games that you don't know this is from a different studio and time. From the moment you boot the game, to the menu and every FMV and briefing, to the actual gameplay itself, this game's music is there, drawing you into the world and setting and just selling it to you. It, of course, resonates with the signature cartoon Cold War silliness of Red Alert 3, but often it also just fucking rocks, and I find myself nodding my head as I order tanks and zeppelins around. I especially love the Russians' men's choral work on the menu that instantly makes you feel like you're sipping vodka with your fellow conscripts while taking bets on who has to feed the war bears next. If you don't believe me, why don't you check it out for yourself? Ba da 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 da. Like, I don't know about you, but like, I could not ask for better menu music. This game is awesome in that regard. Absolutely love it. When I was a teenager, I even enjoyed the soundtrack so much I downloaded it and I used to listen to it for pleasure on its own. I don't think I'd go that far anymore, but it is nevertheless top-notch and slays its intended role in the game. The voice work is also spot on for a Command & Conquer game. The units in particular hold up the series' legacy, from Tanya's iconic "Let's Rock" to the spies who are Sean Connery James Bond send-ups, the anime girl rocket angels, or the humble Russian conscripts. I'm sure there are more units with more references to things than I'll ever understand in this game. It's all pitch perfect for this very silly game. As for general sound design and sound effects, well, I can't say I even noticed it, which says to me it's perfect. Sure, it could have had a particularly meaty cannon blast or great death scream that you could rave about, but really for a game like this, sound design is at its best when it acts like the projector at a movie theatre. It's an essential piece of the puzzle in order for you to see the movie, but ultimately, if it does its job and doesn't get in the way, you don't even think about it being there, even though obviously it is. The important thing is, there's nothing bad about it. The projector isn't flickering and sputtering, as it were. There's no sound work that draws you out of the experience, just as much as there's none that's so awesome it overwhelms it. Overall, all of the music and sound is as super competent as the rest of the package and hits all of the right notes to enhance the fun. I love the interface for this game. There's nothing particularly special about it, and at the time it was downright bog standard. And that's what I love about it. Simple buttons, straightforward options, the right feedback with no stupid showing off. To top it off, great graphic design, music and presentation, and some of the best briefing screens I've ever seen. The actual in-game UI isn't perfect, but its flaws are very minor. Mostly the interface here is a standout that helps sell the vibe of the game and aids you in playing it. After all, this game had a decade plus of refinements from previous CNC games to draw on, and this is that classic CNC interface minimap in the upper right that doubles as a communication screen when the live action actors need to talk to you. The borders of it are also used to indicate your base's power and your resources. Underneath that are your buildings and unit production options neatly together in nested tabs that you can use at any time and corresponds to keyboard shortcuts. Only problem with it is if you have multiple production structures, they get a numbered tab, each designated by a logo. A little airplane for air units, a boat for naval, etc. with a 1, 2 or 3 next to them. This is great and it works, but there's no way to tell which tab corresponds to which building. The numbers correspond with the order in which you built them, which is fine, but sometimes in the heat of battle, buildings get destroyed and rebuilt and the numbers get erased and replaced, and you lose track of which one is which. It is really a very minor point, but only once or twice in my time with the game did I ever build something at the wrong facility and accidentally because of this. And a lot of the time, multiple facilities isn't really even necessary, unless you love hearing insufficient funds on loop. Also, the lady that voices all of these interfacey kind of lines, like, cannot deploy here, your base is under an attack, and so on, is unique per faction, and has an accent to correspond. This is one of those tiny little touches that really would have made no difference to the gameplay, but is appreciated, as it just helps distinguish and sell the experience of each faction that little bit more. Down the bottom right, you have advanced unit commands like aggressive guard and passive stances, and advanced unit controls like queuing up orders and a planning mode. These options are great, and you will use them all the time, but they are mostly keyboard shortcut oriented commands. You are rarely going to be using the mouse to implement them, and they hide them behind a little animated tab you can retract or deploy, because once you've learnt the keyboard shortcuts, you have little need to ever have them taking up screen real estate. On the left hand side we have minimal interface. In the top corner we have a tiny menu for issuing commands to your co-commander. Useful occasionally, but I'm glad it's as small and out of the way as it is. In the bottom left and in icons along the left hand side we have our special command abilities, which let us call down airstrikes or satellite-based attacks or buffs and debuffs and similar direct powers under your control. Apart from your standard text notification system, that's all she wrote on the interface. Before I get into the campaigns, there is one other thing about the gameplay I'd like to flag, and that's just how fast it all is. I think I've already indicated I'm not some RTS fanatic with years of competitive play, nor have I ever played every RTS ever made, but I find this game's pace in terms of most of the other RTS games I've played to be on the very, very fast side. Most units die in just 1 or 2 hits, provided they are on the losing side of the scissors paper rock equation. Even on the winning side against damage types they are strong against, units still don't last very long. This isn't a bad thing. In fact, once you get used to it, it's quite enjoyable in the sense that micromanaging your units yourself doesn't just pay off, but becomes virtually essential. And fun micro is the essence of good RTS. It also is one more reason why just making a huge death ball of units and sending it at your enemies isn't likely to work. Your horde of tanks can find itself just a couple of almost dead tanks in seconds against just a few well-supported defences. Micromanaging a smaller group of units and making sure they in turn are well supported by infiltrators, artillery or air support almost always works better than just trying to overwhelm your opponent, and that works in the game's favour in terms of tactics, strategy and fun. The downside is, if you go somewhere else on the map for even just a second to say whack down a power plant or give some units some orders or something, you can lose units or entire armies, structures and forward bases by the time you even hear that voiceover telling you you're under attack. Granted, this is always an aspect of RTS games, and part of what makes a player really good at RTS is how they manage their divided attention. Stuff in Red Alert 3 dies so fast that you can pretty much guarantee that when you click away on the minimap to go do something else that you are going to hear unit lost. It also means that you have to be on point in the directions you give to units. And it's a good thing the pathing in this game is competent, because if one of your aircraft has just a wingtip stray into the range of an anti-air, you can kiss it goodbye. And the same is true for land and naval units. What all this adds up to is a game where your plays and strats either come off spectacularly or fail miserably all at once, with tipping points playing out in just a few seconds. In the single player, this doesn't equate to being unable to make a comeback after a defeat, however, as the AI seems to lack the ability to really understand how to punish your mistakes on the macro level or how to recover from their own. This means that building up a decent defense, relying on the AI to be unable to do anything intelligent to circumvent it, then methodically microing just a single relatively small but well-composed force at a time is often a reliable strategy. Another thing that usually works is suiciding a force at the enemy's base in the opening minutes of the game to wipe out key production facilities, knowing that the AI won't replace them for some bizarre reason. These kind of strats will obviously get you stomped in multiplayer. Anybody with an actual brain will always be able to figure out how to take out defenses without exposing themselves too much, or will replace key facilities when they go down. But I don't really know anything about what good strategy and tactics looks like in this game's multiplayer. The state of Red Alert 3's scene and meta is a mystery to me, so I'll leave that to whatever wikis and guides are out there by people who know what they're talking about. Combine this speed with the simplicity of your economy, and everything in this game goes zip. So there's only one resource, a yellow ore that you can dig up by placing your refinery in the very optimized spot of directly in front of the ore mine. The game is so unconcerned with this part of your economy and so happy to optimize it to be as straightforward an income as possible that it often starts your levels with several of them built for you. It provides you credits, which you spend on your units and buildings. Everything builds fast, provided you can afford it. Like a couple of seconds at most fast. But if you can't afford it, everything pauses in your entire economy and production chokes. Ore mines can run out of ore as well, where they don't stop providing you money entirely, but at a significantly reduced rate. There's also power to manage. You need power plants to power your buildings, production and base defenses. If you don't have enough power, everything goes kaput. Two factors to always keep in mind when considering expanding your base or deploying a strategy, and two factors that also happen very quickly. The tutorial is another big reason I recommend this game to RTS newbies and returning players. In typical tutorial fashion, if you are in any way familiar with the conventions, idioms and controls that typify an RTS, you could get away with skipping it, as your jaw will be on the floor in terms of how basic it starts. Look, I'm not saying don't play it, as it does get everything you need to know across, but you will be bored being told very slowly how to zoom the camera in and out and similar such basics. There are some tidbits about some more advanced controls like reversing your tanks, but a more comprehensive and direct way to learn about that stuff would be just looking at the key mapping interface or reading the manual, which you can find with a quick Google. I seriously recommend doing this. It's brief and will save you a lot of time. If you're entirely new to RTS, this tutorial is awesome. It goes through literally everything from the most basic, and I mean basic, to the most advanced aspects of this game, in a humorous and accessible, down-to-earth way. If you literally had no idea what an RTS is and what Command & Conquer is, this tutorial has got you and sets you up nicely to begin the campaign. For everyone else, well, it's baby steps are just too baby for anyone who, say, knows what the word Zerg Rush mean. It does go over some Red Alert 3 unique stuff like co-commanders, but maybe only check it out if you're having trouble understanding how to do it. It all seems pretty straightforward based on contextual cues and genre conventions to me. Overall, I love that this tutorial is here for newbies, and it's done very well. It's fully voiced by 3 tanks and is charming and funny. Sure, you could have had a tutorial aimed at veteran gamers that was brief and just targeted game-specific and advanced controls and concepts, but not having that is hardly a criticism. Why would a studio waste time and money on, at best, a nifty extra touch? As it is, the tutorial is split into several levels going over just a few concepts each, so you can always just pick the ones that apply to you, which is great, but they are still way too slow and tedious for me. And for reference, it took me an hour and 20 minutes to complete all of the tutorial missions, and I really only played and recorded them for the sake of this video. Overall, it's a great tutorial, it's poor entertainment, use it if you need it. Each of the 3 factions gets a 9-mission campaign. making for a total of 27 missions that I finished in 25 hours this time around. I'd give or take a few hours, as this is probably my 5th time finishing the game in my life, and already know how to cheese a few of the levels. At the same time, I confess I sometimes enjoy turtling extensively and pointlessly wasting time in single-player RTS sessions, and there are times where most people would be finishing a level way faster than me. I also got stuck a couple of times despite my previous playthroughs, so there were a couple of levels I replayed over and over again, which incidentally I'd say is a hallmark of a great RTS campaign. I'd say take 5 hours either side of me for leeway depending on your skill with RTS. If you get this game on special, especially if you can get the expansion bundled with it, I'd say the single player on Red Alert 3 represents great value. I saw they can be as much as $30 each on Steam in Australian dollars and $60 for a 14-year-old game, even with a good amount of content, seems a bit like, why wouldn't you just wait for it to go on special? Guarantee you it's just a matter of waiting with it on your wish list, and you can probably get both for like $10. If you can find a good price, this game is a bargain because of this campaign, and you'll rarely get more entertainment per dollar. You can play the campaign in any order, with missions unlocked for replay as soon as you finish them. I'm going Soviet, Allied, Empire, just because it's left to right order, but it doesn't really matter, and you do you, babe. I'm going to play every mission on hard difficulty, but I'd only recommend this to people who love RTS games. If you are new or don't like them much, normal or easy would probably work better for you. I'll try not to spoil the plot, as little as there is, or the great FMVs of each campaign too much. If you want to see all that stuff without playing the game, it's all over YouTube anyway, if you want to search for it. The campaigns all kind of have a similar story. There are 3 factions, and they are all at varying stages at war, teaming up or betraying each other, until you beat the game and your faction wins. I know I put a spoiler warning at the start of the video, which covers my butt for all the random footage I use, but I'm not looking to do a deep dive on the characters and story here, particularly when there are other videos on YouTube doing that. This game is so silly that the plot and the story don't really merit much discussion or analysis beyond a hearty recommendation to go experience it for yourself, because it's a hoot. They aren't the meat of this game, but the well-crafted trappings, containers and gift wrapping the gameplay comes with, and they are lovingly realised with no detail, care or thought spared, and I thank the developers with all my heart for that. But no, I'm going to talk mostly about the way the game plays for each faction and how they interlock to make a great RTS. The Soviets are technological underdogs. Not that they don't have technology, it's just that where other factions have fast, sleek, stylish robots, Soviets have rickety, clanky, clunky robots. Soviets are all rusty Tesla coils, diesel punk spider legs, giant grinding tank treads, loud cannons, and big dumb rocketry. In the rock, paper, scissors trinity, they are the rock and have the strongest army and dominate the other 2 factions on land. They have the biggest, dumbest tanks that literally crush everything. Fragile but fast anti-vehicle and anti-infantry spider bots, and slow and clunky but extremely deadly long-range V4 rockets for artillery. They also have my favourite unit, the absurdly useful anti-air transport, the Bullfrog, which might be one of my favourite units in all of RTS. They carry 5 infantry, are an effective, fast, mobile piece of anti-air flak, perfect for escorting vulnerable vehicles, and they can traverse both land and water, meaning they're also perfect for escorting vulnerable ships as well. On top of that, it has a cannon, and to unload its infantry, it shoots them out of the cannon, and they parachute back in, meaning it's useful for delivering infantry onto different elevations or over otherwise impassable objects or defences. More than any other unit in this game, and there are heaps of wonderful iconic units in this game, the Bullfrog embodies what makes the fun in this game tick. It's an indispensable, versatile, multi-role unit that can, for example, transform seamlessly from a crucial element of a carefully cultivated and timed land assault plan to a backbone support unit for a naval defense, all while being cute and silly beyond all reason. Look, even the bears do somersaults and parachute in with this guy. You and everyone you know will never be this confident or beautiful, and I love the bullfrog with all my heart.
Enemy units detected.
The Soviets are the most straightforward and direct of all the factions, and as the Rock in the Rock, Paper, Scissors, their building style is just to whack up scaffolding and slowly build the thing on site directly. Presumably speeding up the process by throwing infinite amounts of conscripted labour at it. Your buildings are vulnerable while being constructed, especially if you run out of funds and they remain under construction out on the open battlefield for a long time. The advantage is there is the least micromanagement in the process. You plonk the building down from the menu, wait till it's done, and then bam, you got an oil refinery. On top of this, technology tiers unlock just by building key structures, eliminating an entire economic cost-benefit analysis that the other factions have to do choosing when to upgrade their tech trees. As an offset, they don't get to repair their units without building a special building called a crusher crane, which functions both as a secondary construction yard, enabling a second build menu on the UI, and as a unit recycler that allows you to suicide units to get resources back, which is a feature I barely use. Other factions' various production structures come with repair drones that operate in a radius. The Soviets only get the crane. It's basically an upfront cost to buy into repairing, where the others get it for free. At the same time, by making it a separate structure, it is a little bit more versatile for forward positions and bases, in that it can further build structures around it. But on the downside, it doesn't produce units if you need forward repairs like the other factions get. So it really is a bit of a nerf for the Soviets. Fair enough, given just how powerful their land army is. There is a theme in general with the Soviets that makes me describe them as direct. They are the least of the three factions about management. Get a line of big tanks with some air defense and some V4 rockets behind them and a dreadnought off the coast and crawl forwards while you watch everything die in an unending hailstorm of rocket explosive doom. Run over actual entire tanks with your even bigger tanks. Rely on the Kirov's ridiculous health and bomb their fully operational air defenses from the sky. Losses are an understandable necessity in achieving victory for the motherland. The Soviets are as fun and versatile as all the other factions, and they are no joke in the air or on the sea. They are by far the faction who are most likely to have straightforward vehicles, where a tank is just a tank, a submarine is just a submarine, and a boat is just a boat with spider legs that lets it go on land. They have brutal and dumb special abilities, like a magnetic satellite that sucks vehicles up into space, and then another power lets you decommission satellites from orbit and drop them onto the battlefield and crush your enemies. And some of the vehicles you suck up come crashing down too. They'll also casually use toxic waste as weapons, so war crimes are mostly all good with them, if that tickles your fancy. No honour here, just good old Soviet justice. Like all factions, they get two super weapon buildings. A Type 1, a strategically devastating utility, and Type 2, a giant everything go boom doom weapon. For the Soviets, their Type 1 is the iconic Iron Curtain that makes some of your armor units invincible for a brief window, but kills exposed infantry. Their Type 2 is the Vacuum Imploder, which makes a gigantic bang boom implosion explosion thing. They also get one special character infantry commando, Natasha, who can snipe through units in a big line and call in precision airstrikes to wipe out buildings and vehicles. She also has a nifty special ability where she can snipe the pilot out of a vehicle, rendering it capturable by your own infantry. I found their campaign a blast and a fairly gentle introduction into the game and its concepts and gameplay. Well, until I hit Mission 7, Mount Fuji to Tame a Living God, which is a standout mission for me from this game. All you need to know is that it involves invading Japan as Russia. For one, the introduction sequence involving a single conscript and a single warbear being the only survivors of an unsuccessful invasion attempt that you have to navigate while they banter is hilarious to me, and I would watch a whole show about the bear and the conscript making their way through a war zone like Han Solo and Chewbacca. But for 2, Once I got to the part of the mission where I got to build my base and do the RTS thing, I got wrecked, like over and over again. It was the first mission where you are really facing overwhelming forces and you need to be on top of your shit, putting everything you've learned about the game together. The first mission where I really had to hit that sweet spot between economy, defense and offense in order to succeed. And it was a bitch, and I had to quit for a day or two and come back to it for a few more times before I figured out how to maintain that tipping point between progress and overextension while warding off their attacks, until all that balance piled up in my favor and I crushed them. It was rewarding as hell, and once I figured it out, I got to have fun with the game at its best. Even though my useless AI co-commander got wiped out straight away, it didn't matter. I won anyway. On the other hand, the final mission of the campaign, I had to cheese because, well, it's one of those missions where if your opponent gets to run away from you economically, you can't possibly beat them while they churn out overwhelming forces several times over what you can afford. And boy, are they set up to do that with like 5 ore mines already running from the moment the mission starts. So, crippling them economically by blowing their refineries up with a submarine in the opening minutes of the level only seemed fair to me. Probably unnecessary on easier difficulties, mind you, but a good example that this game isn't always consistent in pacing or difficulty. And it doesn't always nail every level in terms of balance, but it's only a minor gripe and nothing I can't work with. After all, this is the same level where you gleefully blow up the Statue of Liberty with even more giant rockets in order to win, and that's a good time. Next is the Allied campaign, which for me was a huge standout. Like, this thing has the most memorable levels of all and escalates in a really fun way. The Allies are the scissors of the rock, paper, scissors dynamic, brutally efficient and perfectly precise in some scenarios, but liable to fall apart in others. They have a technological edge compared to the Soviets, but are more conventional than the Empire of the Rising Sun. They are a good balance of technical and direct, with micro often involving 1 or 2 key support units or abilities, like the laser guidance on the Guardian tank, or cryocopters backing up an assault, or a single assault destroyer drawing fire for a tank rush, or a Mirage tank providing cloaking for an attack group. The Allies build and upgrade their technology in a more global way. When you build something from their menu, instead it is built off screen while a timer counts down. Once it is finished building, you can then place it down on the battlefield where it will assemble in mere moments into a fully functional structure. This 2-step process is just that little bit more management intensive than the Soviets. It has its advantages in that there is no period of vulnerable building time prior to getting your structure, and also you can keep a building ready to go and whack it down at the exact moment you need it as a part of a strategy. But you can also get distracted by urgent matters, and that boot camp you should have placed down minutes ago is just languishing in your build tab, waiting to go while you coordinate a desperate defense or something similar. With the Soviets, that structure would have been down, finished by itself, and you could have started hotkeying out troops without even clicking away from the part of the map you were concentrating on. The Allies unlock tech tiers by researching a clearance level. If you click on your construction yard, you'll see big blue arcs of knowledge lasers or something, I don't know. The point is that they show you which structures are connected to your construction yard's clearance level, which is expensive and locks the yard out from building anything else while it does it, so is also expensive in terms of time. You create forward bases as the Allies by using your Prospector ore mining vehicle's special ability, which transforms them into a command hub, which projects a building zone around it, allowing the Allies to deploy structures. The special ability of these command hubs is to tech up the clearance levels, and if you click on them, you get the same big blue arcing technology beams out to any structure they are governing. This means Allies have to pay to tech up their forward bases from the ground up, another notable difference between them and Soviets in terms of management. The Allies' superweapon buildings are their Type 1, the iconic chronosphere that lets you teleport a bunch of armor units to any location on the map. Great for ambushes, but also great for being able to teleport, say, an enemy navy onto the land, destroying them instantly. Their Type 2 superweapon is the Proton Collider, and it does big bang boom bada boom boom in a big radius in your enemy's base. The Allies have a satellite that can freeze things from orbit with a command power called Cryo Shot. They also can use their chronosphere technology to warp a time bomb anywhere on the map. In addition to a precision airstrike ability, these two powers used with the right timing together with the Cryo Shot almost instantly destroy anything in the game, as frozen stuff shatters in one hit. The Cryo Shot is slow, however, and easily dodged. The Allies' special character commando is series legend Tanya, who can rapid-fire insta-kill infantry with her dual pistols and plant bombs on structures and vehicles, wiping them out instantly. Her special ability is a chrono belt thingo that warps her back in time a few moments. That allows you to push, take a bit of damage and wipe out some infantry, then warp back to a few moments earlier when you had full health and withdraw to a more advantageous position or similar. But be warned, the reverse is also true. If you hit that button, you might warp back to a time when you had less health. It sometimes lets you get away with more suicide run-like tactics than you normally would risk, and that's a double-edged sword. Tanya dies fast. Anything that encourages that slight miscalculation can be a very expensive mistake. I've no doubt in the right hands she's deadly, but she is less forgiving than the more ranged-based Soviet sniper Natasha. The Allies dominate in the air, with a wide range of powerful aircraft including the top dog interceptor, the Apollo fighter, and two different types of bombers, a fast strike bomber and a heavy carpet bomber, as well as the aforementioned very useful cryocopter. In the right hands, they are formidable on land or sea as well. They are a versatile faction all over. For example, they have these multi-gunner units. There are two kinds, one a permanent defensive installation and the other mounted on a kind of buggy called a multi-gunner IFV. You can garrison infantry in these multi-gunner structures and transport them in the buggies, and they take on the characteristic weapon of the unit that's inside them. Even super units like Tanya, or animal units like the dog, or engineers or any other unit if you've captured some other faction's barracks. This gives the Allies some Tier 1 firepower that can deal with anything and still be very useful in the later tiers. By default, multi-gunners are a basic anti-air unit that can attack almost everything else as well. They are my favourite faction to play because of their air force. In this game, if you hold down Alt and right-click, you can issue orders to be executed in order in a queue that are very clearly indicated on the UI by a persistent series of green lines. It allows you to draw out flight paths that dodge around defences, strike structures and then pull out, dodging around more defences. Let me tell you, drawing out bombing runs on the fly to knock out key structures whilst you manoeuvre the key components of a strike force into place and execute a coordinated offensive is a joy that keeps me coming back to this game. One mission in particular, which is legendary for anyone who has played this game, is Mission 5, Mount Rushmore, a monument to madness. This is the pinnacle of the game for me. I swear I replay this game just to play this level. It is bombastic and hilarious and surprising. It always takes me a couple of retries as well. It is a tricky juggling act to beat. It involves a certain very important person in a car travelling around a road along the perimeter of the map, activating super weapons while waves of his forces from his very large, well-defended base attack your tiny base. You fail if you kill him for reasons, and if he gets to the end of his road, you also fail. But you can slow him down by various cryogenic freezing methods the Allies have access to. Even halt him in place altogether, although that's not without risks. Should, say, a cryocopter of yours get shot down and crash into his frozen car, that's an instant fail. There is so much that should be frustrating about this mission. It's like a whole bunch of tropes I hate in lesser games, but this level just pulls it all off so well. It really makes you feel like you are both commanding and conquering. Puts you on the edge of your seat while being silly enough to keep you feeling light and bouncy about it. The other highlight I'll pick for the Allies is the finale. Mission 9, Leningrad, the moon shall never have them. This is the one where the famous Tim Curry escaping into space meme comes from. It has a measly 10-minute time limit. A lot can happen in an RTS in 10 minutes, and for a good player or a speedrunner, it's an eternity. For me, it was a challenge that at first seemed impossible with 7 major well-defended targets, but with a couple of redos, it really sees you putting all your knowledge, skill and daring together and refining it into a strategy that gets results. And the level becomes a glorious triumph and climax for both the gameplay and the ludicrous spectacle of the whole silly game. It's no surprises it spawned a meme, really. The Empire of the Rising Sun are the paper of the trio. Like origami, able to take any shape and thus able to respond to any situation. But if your timing is wrong, they are fragile and tear easily. They are the most technical, both in terms of their technology in game and their playstyle. Their units are often transforming mecha, with their special being their transformation. They might blur the line between a land-air unit or sea-air or sea-land. The Empire have the strongest navy, with the Shogun battleship standing out as a mighty unit able to atomize from huge distances with its laser cannon. The equivalent unit in the other two factions, the dumb rockets of the Dreadnought and bombers of the aircraft carrier, are both very powerful and effective, but not quite so direct as the Shogun battleship's laser cannons, and as a result, it can always trump them on the water with some micromanagement. In other words, as an aircraft carrier or dreadnought is getting in position and playing its animations in order to launch their attack, the battleships go pew 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 pew, backed up by fast and powerful Naginata cruisers and Sea-Wing anti-air, and they are an impenetrable floating wrecking ball. They have the most oddball building style. When you click a building on the Empire's build tab, you get a very fast countdown, and then a little awkward nanocore, slowish hover vehicle thing pops out of your construction yard. That nanocore's special ability is then to scoot over to where you tell it to and unfold into the structure you chose to build, anywhere on land or sea. A bit management intensive, but it shakes up the advantages and disadvantages a bit. Empire do not have to unfurl their cores in designated build areas, and when you spend the credits for any given building, they hit your economy in a very concentrated time frame, meaning you can pump out a bunch of cores very quickly and set up forward positions anywhere on the map, but you better be rich first or you're going to have an insufficient funds logjam all up in your business. They still have a build time while their nanocore builds itself into the structure, so they still have a vulnerability when building, and they are extra vulnerable as slow nanocores. On the other hand, if you can sneak a nanocore for a dojo and a mecha bay behind your enemy's base and get them set up in the chaos of a battle, you've basically already won the game and they don't even know it yet. They need each structure they deploy to independently research their own tech levels, making it a little similar to how the Allies do it, but incurring a higher cost in time and credits for multiple production structures of the same type per forward base. Given that, Empire can quickly and efficiently pop down structures anywhere, having the most costly and individual upgrade structure seems a reasonable trade-off. Empire's Type 1 utility superweapon is a nanoswarm, an impenetrable barrier that can basically lock a large segment of the game map out of bounds for absolutely everything for a short period of time. Perfect way to lock out a gathered defense force while you knock out their power, or to save your own key structures when they fire a superweapon at you. Their Type 2 superweapon building is the Psionic Decimator, and it goes boom boom pow pow big butter boomy boom in a giant radius in your enemy's base. Empire Commander abilities are kamikaze drones that I admit are in very poor taste and resemble Zeros. They are overpowered as hell, however, and fully upgraded can wipe out key structures really quickly. They also get balloon bombs that can be equally as devastating, in addition to quite a few offensive, defensive, and economic buffs. Overall, Empire are the most management intensive. They can affect the most exotic and efficient strategies, able to expand rapidly, but equally as able to overextend and fall apart. Look at their special character infantry commander, Yuriko. an anime schoolgirl psychic experiment parody. She's the most versatile of the three faction special characters. Able to attack any target, she can use her psychic powers to down aircraft and send boats and tanks floating up into the sky or tear apart buildings. And her special is a huge area of effect attack that insta-kills infantry. But she is the one that needs the most minding to be used well, as she's the slowest and can only attack one target at a time, meaning that if she is approached by a tank and an attack dog, and you aren't there to tell her to attack the dog first, she will still be busy levitating the tank in the air as the dog tears her throat out. Able to devastate an entire base by herself in the right hands, but nothing but a very expensive casualty in the wrong hands. It sums the Empire up well.
New objective received.
My favourite units are, of course, all of the transforming units. My heart especially goes out to Mecha Tengu, who is a direct Macross reference, an air-to-air interceptor that transforms into a hovering anti-infantry fast scout that can traverse land and sea. Of course, they're the weakest of the three factions' interceptors by a mile, but if they are in their ground mode, the enemy interceptors can't attack them. The speed and mobility combined with their ability to pop into an enemy's realm of engagement at a time and place of your choosing makes them very useful and powerful. Just a few of them, surprise popping up in the return flight path of a bomber, will have an expensive memory in no time. If you jet out of there fast enough, you might even be able to wait out your transform's cooldown and walk mode to safety before interceptors smoke you. Great for dropping out of the sky and roasting isolated bases, infantry and light vehicles. A dream harassment unit, as fragile as it is glorious. The Striker VX is another favourite, which goes from an air-to-ground missile attack helicopter to a ground-to-air missile defence walker. This is a tricky micromanagement dichotomy to throw in the mix. You have a unit that switches from being defenceless in the air to defenceless on the ground, and simultaneously switches its ability to be devastating to the air or devastating to the ground. This is replicated in the Sea Wing, except replace the ground with the water and Walker with submarine. A fun tactical dynamic for you to play with. It gives you versatility, an occasional get out of free jail card, and it forces your opponent to field a more expensive comprehensive force to deal with your forces. Of course, if you fuck it up and screw up the timing or placement of your forces, if you transform those few seconds too late and fail to escape the enemy tanks, or go head to head for too long and get overwhelmed, you're dead meat. There's also the Typhoon tank, which is weak when considered from a tank versus tank equation, but has so many possibilities in terms of maneuverability that it can be the backbone of many strategies. Even your basic base defense towers require you to hit the transform button to change it from a ground defense to an air defense. It's great that you get 2 in 1, but in order to give you that, it buys that little bit of your attention and timing to hit that transform button from something else that you could be doing. A standout mission for the Empire is Mission 3, Odessa, Behold the Mighty Saint of Swords, where you control a gigantic 3-headed, 3-sworded samurai mecha Godzilla tripod robot thingo called a Shogun Executioner. It goes monster movie stomping all over the Soviet city. It's really fun and not entirely mindless either, as you do take damage and can die. But Tesla coils heal the Shogun Executioner, so I mean if you actually try, you pretty much can't die. You only get to use the Shogun Executioner in one other mission, Mission 8, Moscow, Crumble, Kremlin, Crumble, against the Soviets and their Tesla technology again. I respect this decision. The giant robot stompy times are fun, but simplistic, and wouldn't have been as much fun had they been overused. Sure, it would have been cool to have a trickier map where you use it against the Allies and have no easy heal for it, but the campaign didn't need it. As most of what makes the gameplay actually fun, all the, real-time strategy of it, is removed with the big stompy boy, so sparing use of its novelty gets a big tick from me. Most of the rest of the Empire missions typify that strategic ultra samurai vibe. A swift strike in the right place at the right time, get that wrong and an honourable death awaits you. Lots of great naval stages where the Empire really gets to shine. In general, the entire game is a blast on the water or in the air more so than on the ground. and the Empire straddles them all gracefully like the anime robot-loving champs they are. The final mission for the Empire, Mission 9, Amsterdam, the last red blossom trembled, seemed a difficult beast, with your own air units grounded until you wipe out the Allies' powerful air base, which they straight up use from the get-go to pulverize you. I lost a bunch of times in a row. That was, until I realised that a well-deployed ground-based air defence in combination with the Empire's overpowered navy was the answer. I thought I needed to focus on ground-based attacks because my spawn point wasn't near a ramp I could get a Doc's core into the water with, because the level, like all of Red Alert 3's levels, is intended to be played co-op as well as single player. Your co-commander spawns right next to the water. I believe if you were actually playing co-op with a real person, you would split the responsibilities up and have one take on the water and the other the land. However, the AI is useless in this particular mission and will get absolutely wiped out without your intervention. So once I realised this and went and made sure I got control of the waterways early, well, things went a lot better. The level having these very accommodating canals running through the middle of it made battleship bombardment a viable strategy all over the map. Overall, not quite as thrilling or spectacular for the Empire, but still a challenge for the keen player to sink their teeth into. The entire campaign is a delight, no matter which faction. There is so much here to love, and it's never really very hard, although it might trick you into thinking it is on the odd occasion. The FMVs and all the effort going into the presentation, and overall just the bug-free tightness of the whole experience makes it an easy breezy Zephyrus good 25 hours of entertainment, and it can be co-opted if you've got other mid-2000s RTS loving mates. Outside of the campaign, the game offers extremely competent and straightforward skirmish and multiplayer modes with a reasonable selection of maps. It also includes an inbuilt replay theatre, which lets you watch back games you've had without the fog of war, so you can minutely study your matches, learn what yourself and your enemy does, and improve. It's one of the reasons I know nailing a good multiplayer title was on the developer's mind when they made this. You don't put in tools like this for people to sharpen themselves exclusively against your AI. Not that the single-player campaign isn't the main part of the show and the biggest selling point. Why else make those incredible FMVs with those incredible actors? But they knew that the multiplayer market was out there, ripe for the right title. And it wasn't this one. I think as cool and fun as all the interwoven asymmetric rock, paper, scissors, land, air, sea, special abilities and transforming units are, it does make it very hard to nail down a super tight, balanced, competitive game. I think the balance that is here is very impressive given all of that stuff, and it's a hoot within the context of the campaign. But I would hazard a guess that it falls apart a bit more under the far more intense stresses and pressures of a competitive gaming scene. The other thing this game doesn't do is there's no included map editor or tools for making your own content for the game. Not that it's a surprise, those sort of inclusions being standard in games was long dead by 2008. There was a map editor called World Builder released online by the developer, so they did think it was important. Maybe they just didn't finish it in time to release with the game, or maybe it just came about later on. The point is, as much as successful multiplayer RTS titles have balanced competitive gameplay, the other thing they tend to have is heaps of silly, stupid custom maps and modded gameplay modes. And given how fun and silly and twisted this game already is, I would have thought it might excel at that kind of stuff. If you're in the know with the Red Alert 3 and their custom maps and competitive scene, feel free to comment about it or make a video reply if that's a thing that people still do. Anyway, that's about it for regular Red Alert 3. This is why I recommend picking it up on special. Unless the gameplay clicks with you enough that you love it so much you start really getting into its multiplayer or AI skirmish mode, you're kind of done once you finish the campaign. $30 seems a bit steep for this given the game's age. Under $10 and it's a steal. For me, as a busy working man, that's actually a big plus. A finite, fun little romp every now and then. Now, if you're one of those players who really enjoyed the gameplay, well, the devs have heard you and the expansion pack is aimed right at you.
Well, that's a good question, thank you. With the Soviet Union's government dismantled, we can now share the benefits of the free market with those who have been excluded. The Allied occupation forces are only there to ease this transition. I mean, there has been rumors of a possible resistance, but so far, I'm glad to say, we haven't seen anything of the sort. The Russian people have
Command & Conquer Red Alert 3 Uprising. Once again, they nail the presentation, sound and music. This expansion is entirely consistent in quality with the original game. Just listen to this new, more Japanese style menu music. Sets the mood, is a pleasure, has cool Allied gunships over Japanese city rather than Kirovs raining bombs over an Allied city. We have the same tutorial, a short expansion campaign, challenge and skirmish modes. The skirmish mode is the same with the replay theatre and some more maps of course. The challenge mode, which I believe shares maps with the skirmish mode, adds a nice world map that lets you choose challenge scenarios that you can unlock medals on and beat par times with. You can choose which faction you want to tackle which challenge with, unlock their tech tree by beating challenges, and in general do some more commanding and conquering. I've not played this mode for this review, so I'm not going to comment on it much further, but I think that this is here for those people that just really love the gameplay and can't get enough of it. And I know there will be a lot of people who this is true for. There are FMV sequences for the challenge mode, with more cheesy characters and a plot based around a mysterious company called Future Tech. There's a progress bar, and with par times to beat and cool unlocks, this will scratch that obsessive completionist itch beautifully for anyone out there who can't get enough of pressing F for special abilities. So, if you do love the gameplay, this expansion is a no-brainer for this cool challenge mode alone, in my opinion. I personally have never really been able to bring myself to play it through. I just don't quite love the game that much. And beating par times on skirmish maps just doesn't appeal to me tons, even with a little bit of cool narrative framing and FMV work sprinkled on top. But I recognise that this is a quality addition and excellent expansion content aimed squarely at people who actually just fucking love this game as a game, and I respect that, and I also admire how it's kind of making the most out of the assets they have. The expansion adds some new units to each faction. Apart from the challenge mode being a dead giveaway, I know the devs must have decided to double down on the single player side of the game for the expansion, because these new units are just crazy fun, overpowered things that I imagine would be not balanced at all in a competitive setting. I love this. There aren't many new units, but they are all even more over the top silly and dumb than the standard already set by the main game. There are mortars on motorcycles, nanotechnology bow and arrow anime maidens, a gunship that is a gigantic flying piece of artillery, and a monumental ocean defense platform that transforms into a huge floating robot head that shoots gigantic laser beams out of its mouth. They dialed 11 up to 12 for the new units, and they certainly have a big presence in the campaign. The campaign this time around is just a few short missions for each faction, and an additional fourth campaign with a bit of a twist on the gameplay featuring Japanese commando unit Yuriko Omega. Overall, the campaign features an appropriate amount of challenge for someone who's beaten the original game and has a firm grasp on the mechanics. In fact, one of the missions was so challenging it stumped me into not just cheesing it, but going full deep fried. Just like with the original, I played through on hard difficulty, and I'm not even sure co-op is an option anymore, so I definitely didn't do that. And it took me about 18 hours to get through all of the campaigns with a bit of indulgent turtling and more than a few retries. One cool little addition is you get a star and a different coloured outline on the options menu once you've completed a campaign. It doesn't matter at all, but it would have been a nice touch in the original too. Devs out there take note, stuff like that is appreciated. Oh, and just a small note, it seems they've dropped the overt sexual stuff altogether out of this expansion as well. Maybe they realised it was cheap and unnecessary? The Russian campaign sees you as part of the resistance, overcoming oppression from the victorious Allied capitalist dogs. You undo a plot involving Future Tech Corporation doing nasty research on Soviet civilians and military, inventing another secret time machine. You know, that old story. There's one level that gave me a bit of trouble, Yucatan, A Much Brighter Future, where after island hopping with a tiny force of unsupported units, you get a base that's very quickly, immediately, under air and naval assault. I found it very difficult to keep up with the objectives of the mission, defending myself and keeping enough money coming in to keep up with those demands. At first I thought it would be too micro-intensive for me and I'd met my match. But actually, after just a few retries, I came out on top of the struggle naturally, with zero cheese, and it was really satisfying. Exactly the kind of experience I would be looking for in an expansion like this. The final Soviet level didn't stump me quite as much, and was a joy. The big bad has a machine that stops time, but just for you and your forces, and every time he uses it, time stops for a little bit longer. This is a really good mechanic. It puts you under the kind of pressure a hard time limit would, but it's way more fun and creative than a timer in the corner. It sounds like a really overpowered ability, and in an intelligent player's hands, it would be devastating. Fortunately, the AI won't ever really use it to its maximum potential, and use it to get a small strike force to wipe out your power from behind while their main army cripples your economy. So, the final level is an appropriate opportunity to really churn out the Soviet war machine and see the Allies beaten in the land, air and sea. There is nothing that quite feels like the sight of fleets of Kirovs, dreadnoughts and twin blades raining explosive death down upon the capitalist scum. The Allied campaign involves dealing with unrest in the conquered empire of the Rising Sun. Subdued Prince Tatsu aids you in taking down a few of his renegade commanders, only for him to betray you because somehow you taking down his key supporters provides him with a more stable platform to backstab the faction that just beat him in a war? Anyway, the Allies campaign's final mission is, for me, the best mission in all of Red Alert 3. It's a classic two-parter where you deal with a well-defended base in the first part, and then get attacked in the second part by super weapons and an enemy with a huge well-supplied base. You know, a proper RTS final mission. The trigger being your defeat of the first base. This means you can destroy 90% of it and then spend as much time as you want building up your defenses. When you're ready, you blow up the last building and see how you do against the multiple gigantic gigafortresses that get sent up against you. I absolutely love this. I don't consider it cheesing because it taps into all my most satisfying RTS ticks around turtling and building defenses. As a result, I spent way more time on this mission than it probably merited, but I loved every second of it. I play RTS campaigns to indulge in missions like this one, so 10 out of 10. Highly recommend playing the Allies campaign. The Empire's campaign involves an Allied-occupied empire struggling against invading Soviets while the Allies do nothing to help. This involves you capturing first a bunch of Soviet units and then a bunch of Allied units and not using your own that often, which I thought a funny choice for an expansion, but okay. This campaign involved the level that had me stuck. I must have retried it about 10 times. The level is Oki Island, before the Hallowed Tomb, and involves protecting the late Emperor's tomb from the invading Soviets. You capture some fancy new Allied artillery and settle in to defend. Sounds like it's right up my alley, but no matter how I played it, I struggled with resource management and could never figure out how to tackle all of the multiple enemy bases and multiple objectives, and defend the tomb, and defend my base, and expand my base, all without running out of money. I just kept on hitting insufficient funds and getting overwhelmed and dying from being unable to compete with the enemy's armies. In the end, I went full deep fried cheese and the oldest trick in the Command and Conquer book, at least against AI, and that's grab everything you got, rush engineers out as soon as it's possible, and go and capture the enemy's base so early in the game that they are almost helpless to do anything about it. Even if you lose everything, you only need a moment of a building captured to sell it and deny it to your enemy forever. And then that's it, they're crippled for the game. The final mission, in contrast, sees you piloting multiple Gigafortress giant laser-shooting floaty robot heads, so is another walk in the park, Godzilla-style monster movie stomp. That's more fun than challenging. Overall, it's a fun campaign that genuinely got the better of me, but I think balanced it nicely with the big laser robot death machines. The fourth campaign, centered on Yuriko, plays less like a classic RTS and more like a zoomed-in single-unit affair. Yuriko is the only playable unit in this campaign, but she's buffed from the regular game with 4 very powerful abilities at her disposal. The story is basically a Kira, but an anime schoolgirl in Red Alert. It's a fun inclusion, so much so that I played it through all at once in a 2.5 hour straight play session. With skillful use of her abilities, it's not too challenging. Couple of tricky spots that required redos, but nothing frustrating or spectacular. As a bonus 4th campaign, it's a good inclusion and demonstrates exactly the kind of fun custom content that Red Alert 3 is capable of. It's short and certainly not worth buying the game for, despite the promotional art depicting Yuriko as the star of this game. If they ditched another factions campaign for this, I would have been mad, but as an extra 4th campaign, it's a delightful bonus, but would need to be fleshed out considerably before it would make a substantial game or central campaign of its own. It's yet again something a little different from Red Alert 3, a nice zesty little twist on a familiar formula. Overall, as an expansion, this is a good title. It's not too spectacular, I wouldn't call it an essential campaign, but it is the perfect box of extra goodies and challenges for anyone who plays Red Alert 3 and just wants more. That challenge mode in particular represents a huge amount of gameplay for somebody who really loves this game. Being from 2008, it reminds me of the good old days of expansion packs before DLCs, when they needed to be more complete, professionally cohesive and developed packages than modern DLC tends to be. Not that there isn't great DLC out there, or that there wasn't some overlap with the DLC era here, just that I'm glad this one was done with that expansion pack template in mind. As noted before, I wouldn't pay full price for this or the original game simply based on how old they are, not how good they are. The reality is you can definitely find a game like this for a wonderful price with a bit of patience and searching, and a game like this one should be good value. It's not an unmissable experience, it's not a pivotal entry in the canon of gaming or a 10 out of 10 masterpiece. What it is an extremely fun 40 to 50 hours of gleeful B-movie schlock and fast-paced RTS action that is a no-brainer for any fan of the genre just for the smooth, functional, bug-free cohesiveness of the whole package alone. Play it, love it, tell me what you think in the comments, and like and subscribe. Thanks again for listening, and I hope to share with you all again very soon.